Go. Good morning. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so we are now in our third session of Birth of a Nation, Transitions from Moses to Monarchy. And this is our second week discussing Moses. Moses obviously is such an important figure in the Bible and figure throughout history, particularly in American history. And as a great liberator. And so he really deserved more than just 1 week. And so actually, coincidentally, with what happened this week in our own country, this week we're actually going to be looking at the transition from Moses's leadership. And if you're wondering what this picture is, it is Moses laying hands on Joshua, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And once again, we have to understand the importance of Moses and his greatness by looking at the phrase from the verse from Deuteronomy, "Never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses, whom the Lord singled out face to face." So today's agenda, we're going to do a quick review of session 2. We're going to talk about turning points in the Moses narrative, the importance of the land and God's plan for the Israelites, the incident of the spies, the fate of Moses, the transition of leadership, and then we'll look at who was Joshua. Last week, we talked about God's selection of Moses. Well, we talked about his birth and the fact that he was raised by his mother and his own mother, despite the fact that and then moved into the Egyptian palace and then had to go to Midian to escape from what he thought would be punishment for killing a taskmaster. And there he saw and was amazed by a bush that would not be extinguished, a fiery bush that would not be extinguished. And there he met God and had what we call his Hineni moment. I am here. He said to God, I'm here and I'm here for you. But then he also expressed 5 points of reluctance, why he did not want to be the leader or why he should not be the leader. But despite that all, God said, you are going to be the leader, but you will be partnering with your brother Aaron. And even though you think you're heavy of tongue, Aaron will speak for you. And then we started to look at, we understood that Moses led the people through the Red Sea. And as soon as they came through, and even actually before they went through, they started to complain to Moses, largely because they were fearful for their lives because the Egyptians were following them. And then after that, because they were hungry and thirsty, which might be reasonable complaints for any people who are stuck in the desert. But these people didn't fully appreciate, in biblical terms, the fact that God was leading them. And it was Moses's constant role over and over again to reassure them that God was leading them. So that's where we will start this week. The biblical narratives include challenges to Moses's power, as we said, and also stress his unique relationship with God. Besides some of the complaints that we already discussed last week, his brother and sister, Aaron and Miriam, speak against him and speak to each other against him, saying, why is he so special, essentially, and why can't we all have some of his power? And basically, God punishes them. And eventually, Aaron dies. Miriam is struck by a plague, but Moses prays for her healing, which is actually one of the first prayers in the Bible, and she does recover. So not only do his brother and sister speak against him, but rebels within the Jewish people speak against him within this group, this ragtag group that's going through the desert. And that can be read about in the stories of Korach and his accomplices, which we're really not going to go through today because I'm more focused on a different area. But if you have an opportunity and you want to, and you want to find out about some of those, you can read about them in the book of Numbers, which is the fourth book in the Tanakh, fourth book in the Bible, fourth book in the Pentateuch, which we call the Hebrew Bible. And it is a book that has many tales of the people, many narratives, better word, of the people as they're crossing through the desert and the trials and tribulations they face and the enemies they face. And it's to some extent an adventure story, but once again, as with all the other books in the Bible, the featured character is God, and God's partner in this adventure through the desert is Moses. In this book, we find two events that are perhaps the most fateful in terms of Moses' life. The first is the return of spies who Moses sends to reconnoiter the land of Canaan. And the second is Moses' response to another one of the many people's complaints of thirst. So let's talk about the importance of the land to God's plan for the Israelites and the episode of the spies. Let's remember God's promise to Abraham. God promised Abraham to make him exceedingly fertile, and that kings would come from him, that he would be a partner in a covenant with God along with his offspring. Then it would be an everlasting covenant. And also, as part of this covenant, God assigns the land to sojourn in and your offspring to come, all the land of Canaan, as an everlasting holding. I will be their God. So this goes back to Abraham, the original patriarch. So we learn from this, excuse me, we learn from this, and I have always found it interesting, that there are really three partners in this grand plan of God. One is God himself. The other is whoever is going to be the leader of the people and the people under that leader. And the third is actually the land. The land is a key element in the covenant between God and the people. And it's a key element, not just for the people's sake, but it's a key element for God. God, the people wouldn't be the people without God, and the people won't be the people without the land, at least in this part of the Torah. And just as an aside, with Tu B'Shvat coming up and the whole issue of land and protecting the land, there are many verses in the Bible which speak to protecting the land and making sure that the land remains fertile, such as letting the land rest every 7 years. So the land, this is not just a story about God and people, it's about God, people, and the land and the relationship amongst the three. God also declares to Moses, I have come down to rescue the Egyptians, to rescue them from the Egyptians and bring them out of the land to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the region of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Now the cry of the Israelites has reached me. Moreover, I have seen how the Egyptians oppress them. Come, therefore, I will send you to Pharaoh, and you shall free my people, the Israelites, from Egypt. So God God is the originator of this expression that the land is flowing with milk and honey, but he also indicates that there are people who are living in the land. And if the land is in fact supposed to be the land of Israelites, what is going to happen with these people? We're not going to specifically discuss that right now because it's a somewhat troubling concept because of the concept of harem, which comes up later, which is just getting rid of everybody who lives on the land. But that's not the main focus right now. But we do know, okay, that it was a land that was plentiful, but also a land that where the Israelites might meet enemies and where the Israelites were going to have to fight to get the land. So here's one of the episodes that we are going to talk about today is the episode of the spies. And in sum, what this episode is about, and it's found in the book of Numbers, is that God orders Moses to send a representative from each of the tribes to scout out the land of Canaan. Moses tells the spies to determine the strength of the indigenous population and to investigate the productivity of the land. 10 of the spies return with a negative report indicating that while the land is flowing with milk and honey, the inhabitants are too powerful. Only Caleb and Joshua return with positive reports. Following the return of the spies and the negative report of 10 of them, the Israelites once again wish to return to Egypt, and they rebel. The whole community broke into loud cries, and the people wept that night. All the Israelites railed against Moses and Aaron. If only we had died in the land of Egypt, the whole community shouted at them. Or if only we might die in this wilderness. Why is the Lord taking us to that land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our children will be carried off. It would be better for us to go back to Egypt. And they said to one another, let us head back for Egypt. So clearly, the people are still in a complaint mode. They do not feel that they can overcome these giants that the spies bring back a report about, that there are giants who are in the land. They have no self-confidence with respect to that. Then they're afraid. And question, can we blame them for being afraid? But when you hear the people actually wanting to return to Egypt, you know that they have not transformed into an independent people at this point in their journey. So Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before the assembled congregation of Israelites. And it's an interesting turn of phrase that they fell on their faces. It's not falling on their faces to honor the Israelites. It's falling on their faces to, I think, to indicate that they are listening to them. But Joshua and Caleb, of those who scouted the land, rent their clothes. In other words, they went into mourning for the words of the people. They were mourning what these people were complaining about. They felt so differently and so strongly. And they exhorted the whole Israelite community. The land that we traversed and scouted is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will bring us into that land, a land that flows with milk and honey, and give it to us. Only you must not rebel against the Lord. Have no fear then of the people of the country, for they are our prey. Their protection has departed from them, but the Lord is with us, and have no fear of them. So this is sort of our first, this is our first words from Joshua. And we basically look at someone who is a believer in God, feels that they can speak to the entire community, understands where they are in this historical process, understands that the land, understands the tradition of God giving this land to their people, to the patriarch. So they understand that heritage. And they understand the importance of not rebelling against God if they're to get the land. And they understand the role of being brave, and they understand God's protection. The people then don't respond very positively. They threaten to stone Joshua and Caleb, but then God's presence appears, and God rebukes the people to Moses and says, I will strike them with a pestilence and disown them, and I will make of you, Moses, a nation far numerous than they. So God is tired with the people. God is still the main actor here, and God is going through one of his anger management moments and decides that the best way to deal with this people that he's just gotten out of Egypt, or just been responsible for taking out of Egypt, that he, by his own choice, took out of Egypt, is not worth the trouble. But Moses could be worth the trouble, and a nation of descendants from Moses might be the right answer. But Moses is apparently uninterested in a nation of his own, because he doesn't even respond to that part of God's argument. Rather, he offers a twofold response to God, appealing to God's reputation and God's mercy. Moses says, if you slay this people to a man, the nations who have heard your fame will say, it must be because the Lord was powerless to bring the people into the land he had promised them on the oath, and he slaughtered them in the wilderness. Pardon, I pray, the iniquity of this people according to your great kindness, as you have forgiven the people ever since Egypt. So again, here, Moses is appealing to God's reputation. You might even say Moses is appealing to God's vanity. Remember, all of these nations that Moses is referring to are nations that have their own gods. So if God is the most powerful of all gods, which Bible at this point does not say that there aren't other gods, but that in fact our God is the most powerful, then God would really be making a mistake by slaughtering his people, because it would indicate he had no control over them. So Moses is very clever and says, pardon according to your great, and then he adds, pardon, I pray, the iniquity of your people according to your great kindness, as you have forgiven this people ever since Egypt. So many of you will remember, and the following verse recites the 13 attributes of God, Adonai Adonai El Rachum V'Chanun, God, merciful God, which we say on all the holidays, and is our understanding of God's attributes, which include kindness and mercy. So Moses is appealing to God for all the things that God represents, and is also appealing to him, God, in a very clever way. And God apparently is convinced by the argument. Although there's no immediate punishment at this point in the text, God decides that the entire generation that left Egypt, with the exception of Joshua and Caleb, will die in the desert and will not see the land they have been promised. So while Moses is successful at the moment, there's still price to pay. But the generation that leaves Egypt obviously still has to produce another generation. So that may in fact be why there was not an immediate punishment. In a later narrative in the book of Numbers, so now we know the importance of the land to God, the lack of importance of the land to the people, the possibility of Joshua being a leader not just the possibility, the fact that Joshua is one of the few people who has actually seen the land, which I think is an important thing to know. We know that at this point, Moses has not seen the land. Only 12 people have gone and seen this land that's promised to them by God, and 10 people reject the whole concept, whereas Joshua, who has seen the land and consequently can really speak to this three-way connection between God and the land and the people, he is a very important character now. We know that he is a very important character in this narrative. And we know that Moses does not really address the land per se. Moses addresses the survival of the people. So at this point, Moses is, at this point, Moses is, and it says it actually in the text, Moses is essentially a nursemaid to the people, trying to get them through this terrible time. He's also, besides all the other things that he is, like a lawgiver and a teacher and the other important things he is, but he's a nursemaid. He's not the person who is best prepared to describe the land to them because he's never been there. Okay. So the people, after Joshua tries to dissuade the people threaten to stone him. And next slide. So now we're going to move to a different topic, an important one, and a topic which has its foundations in the spy story to some extent. In this second part, we're talking about the actual fate of Moses. And in a later narrative in the book of Numbers, God determines that Moses will not enter Canaan. And we learn that the Lord spoke to Moses saying, "You and your brother Aaron take the rod and assemble the community, and before their very eyes, order the rock to yield its water. Thus you shall produce water for them from the rock and provide drink for the congregation and their beasts." Moses took the rod from the Lord as he had commanded him. Moses and Aaron assembled the congregation in front of the rock, and he said to them, "Listen, you rebels, we shall get water for you out of this rock." And Moses raised his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and out came copious water, and the community and their beasts drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust me enough to affirm my sanctity in the sight of the people, therefore you shall not lead this congregation into the land that I have given them." This is, for many, a very troubling moment because in the Torah, because here Moses has done so much to take these people and develop them. He's given them the law by this time. He's protected them from God's anger. But once again, we have a problem. And I hope you remember, if you remember, last week we discussed another situation where the people were thirsty and angry and complained to Moses. And in that situation, God actually told Moses to strike the rock to get the water out. So here we might say, well, what's so wrong? I mean, Moses did just what he was told before. So I don't know. And does anybody want to offer what they think is really happening here? If you do, just take yourself off mute and.
Okay. I mean, it looks to me like maybe he was supposed to say something verbally to affirm God's sanctity, to talk to them and tell them that this is from God and this is why, etc., etc. But all he did was act and didn't speak on behalf of God. Could that be it?
I think that's a really good point. Whether he was just to speak or whether, and I think that's a good point, he was certainly supposed to affirm the sanctity of God. And affirming the sanctity of God might have been by speaking, or might have been just by doing what God said, and essentially letting the people know that God is giving them water. By striking the rock, Moses, the action could be misinterpreted as Moses having the power to get the water, whereas it is in fact God's power to give the water. So again, there's this whole issue, there's this whole power struggle here. And the question is, how are they presenting themselves to the people? So it's a really good point. And then Susan, yes? Okay. Anybody else? Any comments on this?
On
Yeah,
that,
Judy.
this is just simple. I mean, was there any, I didn't know if there was some significance in when he said, listen, you rebels, shall we get water for you out of this rock? I mean, I don't know. It's a question. I don't know whether that was like, I don't know why that was put as a question, but it might sort of like he was still questioning this to me, whether this is going to happen, whether this is possible. That was just a comment. I have no idea if it means anything at all.
It's a good catch, Judy.
Mhm.
And and it goes also back to what Susan said, because what Moses and Aaron are saying here is, shall we get, it could be read, shall we get water for you out of this rock?
Right.
Rather than God will provide you water from this rock. It's another way of saying it. They're also, it's also a very angry statement. Listen, you rebels, shall we get you water for you out of this rock? And the anger that they have is, guess what? It's a negative emotion. And it is, it's not the way for a leader to be publicly to the people. So there are a number of ways that phrase is an important one, and it helps us to understand why, in fact, this was such a bad thing for Moses to do. Anybody else?
Yeah, I have a question about this. So the way it's phrased is that Moses was supposed to be the leader going into the land of Canaan, and only because he did this terrible thing, that suddenly God says, well, no, it's not going to be you anymore. This always troubled me because it always seemed like Moses was that Joshua was going to have to be the person, having nothing to do with Moses' anger management or whatever, that you need a different kind of leader in what will be a military campaign and so on, and that Joshua is always going to be the leader. And instead of God saying, okay, you had your time and now pass the mantle to Joshua, God is taking this opportunity to say, well, you did this really bad thing, so I just decided this minute it's not going to be you. I've always had this problem.
I think that's a really, of course, a great point, Barbara. And it, yes, it does seem that God has had the intent at this point to allow Moses to take the congregation, the people into the land. And I actually didn't read it that way, and it's a great point. But perhaps it's also the point at which God finds the excuse just to tell Moses, listen, maybe you thought this, but it's not going to happen. So it's a convenient way for God to send this bad news.
And cruel.
And cruel. And cruel. Very good. Yep, absolutely. Well, we know that God can be cruel. Okay, so let's see what follows. Somewhat later, and to Barbara's point, God does allow Moses to see the land. The Lord said to Moses, I'm sorry. There we go. The Lord said to Moses, ascend these heights of Abarim and view the land that I have given to the Israelite people. When you see it, you too shall be gathered to your kin, just as your brother Aaron was. This is after Aaron obviously has died. For in the wilderness of Zin, when the community was contentious, you disobeyed my command to uphold my sanctity in their sight by means of the water. Those are the waters of Meribeth Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin. That last sentence basically establishes that obviously there was some well there that the Bible is now giving us a clue with. The Bible often gives certain clues about actual geographic locations and kind of gives explanations as to how they got there. So Moses is entitled to see the land, which I don't know whether this is any less cruel on God's part or perhaps even more cruel by allowing Moses to see the land. I mean, if God had left Moses without that opportunity, perhaps it would have been a simpler thing. So what is a really, now we have to talk about the book of Deuteronomy. The book of Deuteronomy, as we said, the book of Numbers is a discussion of the people's journey through the desert. And the book of Deuteronomy, which is the last book, the fifth book of the Torah, is a speech by Moses, an entire speech by Moses, telling the people it's his final speech, his final exhortation. And he reviews a number of the incidents that happened as they went through the desert. And he also gives the 10 Commandments for a second time. So it's redundant in some ways, but different in others. But it is a book that was probably written from a different perspective than the book of Numbers. It's a book that was probably written by the quote unquote Deuteronomic historian, and it has a somewhat different theology than the other books of the Bible, and that's a whole class unto itself. But the interesting part of this book is some of what it reveals to us about Moses. So in a more personalized version of this last episode that we read about in the episode of the rock, in Numbers, can be found in the book of Deuteronomy. It is astonishing. It is an astonishingly personal moment when Moses declares to the people. And it's really, to me, as I read it again, quite emotional. Somebody want to read it? Anybody? I can't see you guys, so. No?
I'll read it.
Thank you. Thank you, Sissy.
I pleaded with the Lord at that time, saying, O Lord God, you who let your servant see the first works of your greatness and your mighty hand, you whose powerful deeds no God in heaven or on earth can equal, let me, I pray, cross over and see the good land on the other side of the Jordan, that good hill country and the Lebanon. But the Lord was wrathful with me on your account and would not listen to me. The Lord said to me, enough, never speak to me of this matter again. Go up to the summit of Pisgah and gaze about to the west, the north, the south, and the east. Look at it well, for you shall not go across yonder Jordan. Give Joshua his instructions and imbue him with strength and courage, for he shall go across at the head of his people, and he shall allot to them the land that you may only see.
So here, here for the first time. I think this is an amazingly personal statement. And not only that, Moses is making this statement to the people. He basically, his defenses are down. And he still defends God and the greatness of God and the power of God. But he indicates that he's disappointed in God. And not only is he disappointed in God, but it was the wrath of it was God's anger with the people that caused this to happen to him. And obviously God had wanted nothing to hear of it, and gave him the instructions to go see the land. And at the same time gave Joshua his instructions, which is not part of the first story, but here Moses is beginning to truly understand his own fate, and perhaps asking the people to say, Moses, we're sorry for you. Perhaps showing more of his humanity than he's ever shown before. So, what do you think about this extraordinary pronouncement by Moses? And what does it tell us about him and his leadership? Anybody want to make a comment? Well, then I'll leave it for you to think about a little bit. Yes. Judy.
Yeah, I mean, I know least of anybody about this whole thing, except that it's never settled well with me. I think that it's just, I agree that he is being punished for what the people have done, and yet he has represented the people, which I think is part of a tenet of Judaism of what's more important, the connection to God or the connection to people, which is an issue. I mean, it's just sort of a concept I think that I struggle with. And I just, I think it's just unfair.
Right, I agree.
And also, what is the relationship to God is more important than the relationship of man to man. That's kind of a reform concept. But I mean, it's something that I sort of was, brought up with. And he just laid the groundwork. And then to show him the land, and then, it seems
You can't go.
not only cruel, but it's spiteful. Anyway, I think it's, I don't know if it's related to Isaac, the binding of Isaac, like God has to do this, to prove that Abraham has trust in him. I mean, it's sort of similar to that in some ways.
Rabbi, welcome. You're here at just the right time.
Oh, good. Perfect. Am I on mute?
Better than better.
Apologize for that. I'm glad
No,
to
that's
catch the
okay.
second half.
That's okay. No, we're at the point where we're talking about the fate of Moses and Moses' astonishing speech in the beginning of Deuteronomy, where he tells the people, essentially, I did want to go into the land, and God's not letting me, and it was probably your fault after all. And basically God stopped talking to me, and here I am, and Joshua's going to lead you. So we're talking about the feelings about that, but also I'm wondering, what do you think this tells us about his leadership? Remember, he is now in this fifth book. It is speeches by him to the people. He knows he is not going to go into the land. So how deeply emotional this must have been for him to lay this at the foot of the people, and how angry he truly must have been, and how good of a leader could he be being so angry.
Well, it's very human. That's all I can say.
Very human.
Yes.
Very human.
Yes.
And maybe it gives us the ability to ask questions and to discuss the concept of God and
Good point, Mom.
continue our beliefs and be a little generous with ourselves, perhaps, when our beliefs, we question our own beliefs.
Good point, Mom. Thank you.
Yeah.
And anyway, in her
And-
discussion of this episode, the Bible commentator Aviva Zornberg, who was one of Rabbi Mishkin's favorites, she cites Rashi and she notes God's relationship with Moses, unique and intimate as it may be, is really only for the sake of Israel. So Moses existed to save Israel from the Egyptians, and as close as God might have appeared to be, it was for the sake of the people. Interestingly, even as Moses, if we go back, that these statements that Moses just made to the people are, I think, in it's chapter 1, verses 3 and 4, or something like that, of Deuteronomy. So Moses is bearing his soul to the people, but at the same time, he in the 2 verses later, he kind of recovers himself, and he understands his role as the transmitter of God's law as he adjures the people. And now, O Israel, give heed to the laws and the rules that I am instructing you observe, so that you may live to enter and occupy the land that God, the God of your fathers, is giving you. You shall not add anything to what I command you or take away from it, but keep the commandments of the Lord your God that I enjoin upon you. So here we see, even after this tremendously emotional speech, Moses does sort of take the grasp of his understanding of what his role is, or comes to terms with what his role is, and emphasizes what his role is by saying, this is the law. This is the law of God. This is the law of God that you need to follow to occupy the land that God promised you. And it's an amazing counterpoint. The two verses to me are an amazing counterpoint of somebody just kind of losing it and then regaining their strength, which speaks to the special kind of person that Moses was. And I'm still, Rabbi, is there anything that speaks to this sudden personal exclamation by Moses of his upsetment with God and his upsetment with the people?
I mean, I think it's really one of the most fascinating parts of the Torah, and I haven't been thinking about it. Just like even hearing you talk about it, I've been fascinated with because the sages are. I mean, as I learned Torah in the last 20 years, it's come up with teachers, and the Etchanan is the parsha, and I pleaded with God. I mean, the idea that Moses would be so upset and share that with God. There's so many things to say about it. I mean, most of it I think is positive, and I think, as your mom was saying, as Shirley said, it's one of the wonderful things of Torah that the characters in Torah are in many ways are presented as real. They're fallible. They have all sorts of different feelings. Moses can be really angry. Moses can be angry at God. It sort of gives all of us permission to be angry with God if we feel there's something to be angry about. I hadn't really thought as much about him. I mean, maybe I have, but just now that you're mentioning it, like pinning it on the people. And most of the time, Moses is seen as a leader that he deals with all sorts of surus, all sorts of trouble and difficulty, and just carries it. And at one point he says to God, I can't carry this on my own anymore. And that's when God says, first, it's like the second time. The first time was his father-in-law in Exodus. Second time was in the book of Numbers. God says, fine, get a group of 70 elders together, like, so you don't have to carry it all yourself. And I think it shows that, it's real in the sense that a great leader will suffer for the people that he's leading and do things and sacrifice for the people. But that doesn't mean that inside he's not also angry and disappointed. And at some point that comes out. But then very quickly, when God says this is not going to go anywhere, and this is my decree, he's able to regain his composure and recognize what it is that he's supposed to, as much as he's upset, he also, I guess, recognizes God's put him in a position to play an important role.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you. Annette, this is Susan.
Yes, Susan.
Okay, I mean, maybe it's because of the time we're living in, but I saw that previous section as discussing transition of power, and that maybe God kind of saw that it was time for Moses to give up his position of power and put it on to the next generation. And Moses absolutely didn't want to. He wanted to hold on to power and be in the promised land. But after all, he was older, and there was a 40-year detour that made him even older. And maybe God saw, in spite of his promise, that it was time to move on to the next generation. And this was his way of doing it.
Yeah. Very good point, Susan. Very good point. Okay, so let's see what else. Yeah.
Maybe it would, it's a way of telling us and the generations beyond the Torah writing that this is the way of the world. You have to accept it because things will happen later on in time with other people, and you just have to accept the fact that you are only a person. You're not a god, and you have to accept certain things because that's what exists. Very difficult.
Part of the continuum.
Very good point. Very good point. And perhaps very appropriate for the moment.
Yeah.
People have to be willing to understand their time, when it is their time, and then be willing to gracefully exit. And I think now in this verse where Moses, as the rabbi said, regains his composure, this is where he starts to shine. This is where he gives the laws again. And can everybody hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Great.
Can I just say one more word about what Shirley said?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll try to. One of my favorite midrashim is, and I've taught it in small groups at TBI. I also used it in my Yom Kippur sermon, I think 2 years ago, is that there's this incredible midrash where Moses is pleading with God, not so much about going into the land, but about not wanting to die. And it's a long midrash, and my teacher and mentor, Rabbi Alan Kensky, wrote an article pointing out that the midrash, which was written probably 1,500 years ago, traces the steps of that one has of denial when one gets news that they're going to die. What's her name? Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote about in the late 60s. The midrash actually has denial, negotiation, and all the other pieces. But it's exactly what Shirley's saying, that he may have also been very upset about going into the land, but the rabbis detect something deeper there. And it's just this idea of grappling with the idea that he's going to die.
Thank you. Thank you both. And if everybody can, Susie, yeah?
Yeah, I'm just going back to this, what he says to the people. The important piece of this for me is his talking about the laws, and that these will keep you safe. These will help you continue to be a people. And that these are the most important things that you need. Those 10 commandments are the most important things you need to think about and keep with you, because otherwise you won't survive. And that's just how you shall not add anything to what I command you or take anything away from it. And that's all I can just think about, how he wants them to follow those rules, because that's how people live and that's how they will continue to be a people.
Right.
And I think that's what we teach our children, that this is how you become a good person. That's
Great point.
Yeah,
Great point.
very good.
So I need everybody to mute again, if you don't mind. So I think what we're trying to say here, all of us, is that perhaps in this verse, in these circumstances, solidifies more than any other Moses' unique role as God's lawgiver and teacher. So let's now transfer to the transfer of leadership and the appointment of Joshua. Moses spoke to the Lord. This is back in Numbers. Let the Lord, source of the breath of all flesh, appoint someone over the community who shall go out before them and come in before them, and who shall take them out and bring them in, so that the Lord's community may not be like sheep and have no shepherd. And the Lord answered Moses, single out Joshua, son of Nun, an inspired man, and lay your hand upon him. Have him stand before Eleazar the priest and before the whole community. Wait, go on mute if you can, please. Have him stand before Eleazar the priest and before the whole community, and commission him in their sight. Invest him with some of your authority, so that the whole Israelite community may obey. This is, so first of all, what we learn from this verse is, again, Moses' recognition that God is the one who will understand who to appoint over the community. We learn that Moses, we see Moses' continued concern for the people, and we see that reference again to the shepherd and the people as sheep. We see the need for someone who can bring people into the land, can lead them into the land, and we see God telling Moses, look, you need to pick this man, Joshua, who is already inspired, whatever that word means. It means he has some sort of spirit. So God recognized a spirit in Joshua, sort of the way God recognized a spirit in Moses when Moses turned aside to look at the bush. And then he says to Moses, and lay your hand upon him, which is a way in the Bible of transferring your powers and transferring your qualities. So if you know the story of the scapegoat on the holiday of Yom Kippur, that the priest lays his hands on the scapegoat so that the scapegoat can take upon him all of the sins of the people of Israel. So the concept of laying one's hands is to transfer good things and bad things. But we know now that Joshua is an inspired man, and that he's going to get even more strength from Moses. Yeah. But we also know that Joshua has to stand before the priest, and this was after Aaron died, so Eleazar was a son of Aaron, and before the whole community to commission him. So the priest played an important role. It wasn't like Joshua was going to be a leader all unto himself. Just as Moses had Aaron as his partner, Joshua has to be recognized by the religious leadership of the community.
And at the same time, nobody knows Joshua now except for God and Moses.
Right.
This is the first time we hear of Joshua in the Bible.
Yes.
And, yeah.
And now we're going to find out what people do when the people do find out. But just thanks, Andy. Interestingly, the ceremony of rabbinic ordination is called smicha, and it means literally the laying of hands. Rabbinic or any ordination, rabbinic cantorial ordination. So we talked about what qualities Moses said the leader should have. He should be inspired. He should be able to lead, and that he must be able to be a shepherd to the people. I have, no, we'll skip that. Anyway, here now, Andy, Moses introduces Joshua to the people here in the book of Deuteronomy. And again, that Moses' farewell address.
Right. And also, that Moses shows the people that he believed in Joshua.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Moses went and spoke these things to all Israel. He said to them, I am now 120 years old. I can no longer be active. Moreover, the Lord has said to me, you shall not go across yonder to Jordan. That really stuck in his craw. The Lord your God himself will cross over before you, and he himself will wipe out those nations from your path, and you shall dispossess them. Joshua is the one who shall cross before you, as the Lord has spoken. So again, in this verse, Moses seems to be coming to some sort of understanding of his fate, but he still maintains this sort of cross to bear against God for not allowing him to go. Yeah. But that reinforces to the people, and there's a little dance going on here in many of these verses of Moses being angry, but still understanding his role as leader, and understanding his role as representative of God, and understanding his role as a translator of God's greatness to the people. And here, and here's a whole nother lecture and course. The fact that God was going to wipe out the nations from the path of the people and dispossess them is an entire course unto itself. And it speaks to what the Bible says was going to happen in the land, although archaeologists say this probably never happened, that there wasn't a mass extinction of any of the other tribes that lived there. But with the Bible talking, with the laws of morality and ethics that the Bible gives, and the idea of dispossessing everybody who's in a land is certainly one that's worthy of further analysis. Then Moses called Joshua after he spoke these things to people and said to him in the sight of all Israel, be strong and resolute, for it is you who shall go with the people into the land the Lord swore to their fathers to give them, and it is you who shall apportion it to them. And the Lord himself will go before you. He will be with you. He will not fail you or forsake you. Fear not and be not dismayed. Chazak, yeah. Be strong. A very important piece of advice. Joshua's role as the next leader of the people is solidified. When the Lord heard your loud complaint after the spies returned from surveying the land of Canaan, he was angry. He vowed, not one of this men, this evil generation, shall see the good land that I swore to give their fathers, none except Caleb, and he shall see it, and to him and his descendants will I give the land on which he set foot, because he remained loyal to God because of you, the Lord was incensed with me too. And he said, you shall not enter it. Joshua, son of Nun, who attends you, shall enter it, and imbue him with strength, for he shall allot it to Israel. Once again, this kind of dance that's going on. Here Moses suggests that he is punished not only for his own sins here and other places, but vicariously bears the punishment to Israel for its sins. Notably, in all of these situations, including that very emotional speech in Deuteronomy 1, we find that Moses, who has spoken on behalf of his people so many times, there is no record of the people imploring God for the sake of Moses, or the people even giving any sympathy to Moses. So it speaks to the loneliness of leadership, and I think it really is a testament to the loneliness of leadership, and it speaks to the need for strength and faith on the part of a leader. Finally, we get to God's charge to Joshua. The Lord said to Moses, the time is nearing for you to die. Call Joshua and present yourself in the tent of meeting, that I may instruct him. Moses and Joshua went and presented themselves in the tent of meeting. And he charged Joshua, son of Nun, he being God, be strong and resolute, for you shall bring the Israelites into the land that I promised them on oath, and I will be with you. Now Joshua, the son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom, because Moses had laid his hands upon him, and the Israelites heeded him, doing as the Lord had commanded Moses. This concept of being filled with the spirit of wisdom, Deuteronomy focuses on the concepts of wisdom. It's a book that introduces many concepts of wisdom, and wisdom, as we know later, certainly in the story of Solomon, wisdom is a key characteristic for a successful leader. And God validates Joshua's leadership after the death of Moses, the servant of God. The Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' attendant, my servant Moses is dead. Prepare to cross the Jordan into the land I am giving the Israelites. No one shall be able to resist you as long as you live. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not fail you or forsake you. Be strong and resolute, or you shall apportion to this people the land that I swore to their fathers to assign them. This is the beginning of the book of Joshua, which is the next book in the Bible. While the Torah is 5 books, there are many scholars who would argue that the Torah is not just a Pentateuch, or 5 books, but a Hexateuch, which is 6 books, because the book of Joshua is so in the same style as the other books, and so much contains so much of the Deuteronomic historians' thoughts. So again, the concept of being strong and resolute, the concept of having to deal with the people and actually assign them different portions of land. And also, in this case, to be a general who is supposed to lead this procession of people through the land and defeat the enemies that are the indigenous people there, which is, as I say, a class unto itself. The people also validate Joshua's leadership, and they answered Joshua, we will do everything you commanded us, and we will go wherever you send us. So here is something that the satisfaction that Moses really never got is now given to Joshua. Let's just quickly see what we know about Joshua. We know so much about Moses. What do we know about Joshua? Well, there are not a lot of biographical details. We know that he's the son of Nun from the tribe of Ephraim. And the text says that Moses actually gave Joshua his name, changing it from Hoshea to Joshua, Yehoshua. and I had to put this in. His name was a theophoric prefix that means God saves. Theophoric meaning the initial yud was added, the initial meaning the first yud was added to the name of Joshua, and it's actually a characteristic of God. So by changing Joshua's name, just like changing the name of Avram to Avraham, where you add the extra H to indicate God's, the relationship between this person and God. Moses understood that and gave him the name Yehoshua. Early in Exodus, Joshua is actually selected by Moses to fight Israel's first battle in the desert with Amalek, and this is where we learn that he is a warrior. But interestingly, no reason is given why Moses selected him. And notably, it is Moses who selects Joshua in this case. Somebody want to say something? I'm sorry.
No.
Okay. Joshua attends Moses at key events. Significantly, he is with Moses when Moses ascends to receive the first tablets of the Ten Commandments, and he's there to meet him when he descends. And he accompanies Moses to the tent of meeting, where Moses speaks to God face to face. He doesn't speak to God face to face, as with Moses, but he is there when Moses is doing that. And apparently, for some reason, he remains in the tent of meeting afterwards. He seeks to protect Moses from the rebellious elders. And again, he's one of the 12 spies Moses sends to scout the land, and one who returned with a positive report. And Joshua is identified by God through Moses. He's the one who will allocate the land of Canaan amongst the tribes, along with Eleazar the priest, which was quite an important civic duty to do that, and also imbued with some sort of theological importance. So he had to be an organized person. He had to be a successful warrior, but we don't really know anything about Joshua from anything Joshua says about himself. We know he was loyal. We know he was loyal to Moses. We assume that he understood God's power. But unlike Moses, who we learn so much about in his biographical detail, Joshua is a little bit more of an enigma. And perhaps in the case of someone who's supposed to represent God, that isn't such a bad idea. In the Talmud, there's an effort to distinguish between Moses and Joshua. Anybody want to read this? Okay. The face of Moses was like the sun. The face of Joshua was like the moon. And that's Talmudic book, Bava Batra. In other words, the Talmud sees Joshua's shine as a reflection of the work that Moses has done. But is that true? When we read Joshua's story, we come to realize that he was much more than a mere reflection of Moses. In reality, there are two Joshuas. The first one was Moses' loyal deputy, and the second Joshua appears with the depth of Moses and taking on of a leadership role. So it's an interesting explanation that the Talmud gives, but I think that the writer of this text was pointed out, I think correctly, that it's not that Joshua just reflected Moses, but it is important that Joshua reflected Moses. So there are countless texts that address the question of why Moses was not permitted to enter Canaan. Surprise, surprise. And this one, our scholar for the week is Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who was the chief rabbi of the Orthodox branch of Judaism in England, and has written extensively on the Bible. And I know that Hadassah here in Port Washington was using one of his books as a source material for their adult ed class. And would somebody like to read this? I think it would be nice if someone would read it.
Okay, I'll read it. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks suggests, in the end, the power of Moses' story is precisely that it affirms our mortality. There are many explanations of why Moses was not allowed to enter the promised land. I have argued that it was simply because each generation has its leaders, and the person who has the ability to lead a people out of slavery is not necessarily the one who has the requisite skills to lead the next generation into its own and very different challenges. There is no one ideal form of leadership that is right for all times and situations.
So you should, thanks, Susan. So you should all give yourselves kudos because you all came up with all these reasons on your own. So I'm very proud of my students.
I know.
Yes, Andy.
Well, when I used to read about Moses followed by Joshua, I used to find Joshua very attractive because he had, we know less about him. We also hear, we don't hear him with difficult thoughts like Moses. He's
Well,
much more
certainly.
straightforward.
If what you're saying, Andy, is that he certainly didn't rise to the level of Moses, I think.
Right, but at the same time, he was a great leader.
Yes, and it shows us also that there can be different leadership styles appropriate to the moment.
Right.
I like this also from Rabbi Sacks, and this is how we're going to end with this. Influence is like lighting one candle with another. Sharing your influence with someone else does not mean you have less. You have more. When we use the flame of the candle to light another candle, the first is not diminished. There is now simply more light. Transferring power, though, is like emptying one vessel into another. The more power you give away, the less you have. Moses' power ended with his death. His influence, though, remains to this day. Judaism has an ambivalent attitude towards power. It is necessary. Without it, the words of Rabbi Hanina, deputy high priest, people would eat one another alive. But Judaism long ago recognized that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Influence, the relation of prophet to people, teacher to disciple, is altogether different in a non-zero-sum game. Through it, both teacher and disciple grow. Both are enhanced. Moses gave Joshua his power and influence. The first was essential to the political and military tasks ahead, but it was the second that made Joshua one of the great figures of our tradition. Influence is simply more enduring than power. And I think when we look at our present situation and people who are in power in our present society, they would be well to read this and understand that power isn't the only thing, but teaching and passing down values through influence is also a very important factor in leading the people. The next week, we are going to go from Joshua to Judges, another book in the Bible that we rarely read, and we're going to look at the role of priests in ancient Israel. So thank you. I'm going to take down my screen.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
Thank you, Annette.
Thank you, Annette.
Thank you.
Great, Emily. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette. Thank you, Annette.